Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a pretty critical mission. We're taking chapter 44 on micronutrients.
The vitamins and minerals.
Exactly. And we're going to distill it down into the core biochemical and, the clinical insights you really need. We're not just listing facts here, we're trying to map the whole metabolic network.
And this is probably one of the most fundamental chapters in all of biochemistry. It really gets to metabolic integrity at its very core. We're talking about essential organic compounds
The vitamin.
and essential inorganic elements, the minerals. The central theme for you to hold on to is cause and effect. These are needed in tiny amounts. And because the body, for the most part, can't make them, understanding what goes wrong in deficiency or toxicity, it all comes down to knowing which specific enzyme stops working.
Okay, so before we even get to the molecules, the source spends a bit of time on how we even figure out what a required amount is. We all see RDA on a cereal box, but how do scientists land on those numbers? It can't just be random.
Oh, not at all. That process is rigorous. It's mainly done through what are called depletion-repletion studies.
So you take it away and see what breaks.
Basically, yes. You look for a clinical sign of deficiency, then you slowly add the nutrient back until that problem goes away. And what becomes very clear very quickly is that individual requirements can vary by as much as 25% around the average.
And that 25% is huge. If you just aim for the average person's need, you're leaving a huge number of people deficient.
Precisely. So to cover everybody, or almost everybody, the authorities set the recommended intake, the RI, at the average requirement plus 2 standard deviations.
So a statistical safety net.
Exactly. It's a mathematical margin designed to meet the needs of about 97.5% of the population. It's a very deliberate public health strategy.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the book defines a true vitamin as something you need in your diet, and putting it back cures a specific disease. But it immediately gives us 2 big exceptions.
Right, and it's a great example of how biology just doesn't like rigid boxes. The first is vitamin D. We think of it as a vitamin, but if you get enough sunlight, your skin makes it from 7-dehydrocholesterol, so it's conditionally essential.
And the second?
Niacin. Your body can actually make it from scratch, but it needs the essential amino acid tryptophan to do it.
Okay, let's dive into the first big group then. The lipid-soluble vitamins. That's A, D, E, and K. And just that name lipid-soluble tells you a lot about them.
It really does. 2 crucial things. First, if you can't absorb fat properly, say in a condition like steatorrhea or if you have bile problems, you can't absorb these vitamins. Deficiency is almost a guarantee.
And the second thing?
They're hard to get rid of. They don't just flush out in the urine. They get stored in your tissues, which means toxicity is a real clinical danger, especially with vitamins A and D.
Let's start with vitamin A, the retinoids.
Right.
This one has a dual function that's, frankly, amazing: vision and gene expression.
It is. And it starts with where you get it. You have the retinoids themselves, retinol, retinaldehyde from animal foods. And then you have the provitamin carotenoids like beta-carotene from plants.
But the conversion from the plant form isn't 1-to-1, right?
Not even close.
Yeah.
The conversion is actually really inefficient. You need about 6 micrograms of beta-carotene just to get the equivalent of 1 microgram of active retinol.
So in the eye, retinaldehyde binds to opsin to form rhodopsin. The mechanism here is it's all about speed. A photon of light hits it.
And instantly, the 11-cis retinaldehyde flips to its all-trans form. That single flip is the entire trigger. It causes this huge shape change in the opsin protein, which kicks off the nerve impulse.
And so deficiency means you can't reset that cycle quickly.
Right. It's progressive. First, you lose sensitivity to dim light. Then you get night blindness. Eventually, you can get actual structural damage, blindness, what's called xerophthalmia.
But the really deep insight here is its role in gene regulation. This is way beyond just vision.
It is. The acid forms all trans and 9-cis retinoic acid. They regulate cell growth and differentiation by binding to receptors inside the cell's nucleus, just like a steroid hormone. But what is absolutely crucial for you to understand is the retinoid X receptor, or RXR.
Okay, so why is RXR so important?
Because RXR forms partnerships, it forms dimers, with the receptors for both vitamin D and thyroid hormone.
So they're all linked.
They are completely inseparable. If you're deficient in vitamin A, you can actually cripple the signaling of the vitamin D and thyroid hormone pathways, even if you have enough of them. And the reverse is true. Too much. Vitamin A can also interfere. It really shows you how interconnected these systems are.
That's a huge takeaway. Okay, moving to vitamin D, we know it needs to be activated.
Yes, 2 hydroxylations. The first is in the liver, which gives you calcidiol. The second, which is the rate-limiting step, happens in the kidney. that gives you the fully active metabolite, calcitriol.
And calcitriol is all about calcium.
It is the master regulator of calcium homeostasis, full stop. It cranks up intestinal absorption, cuts down what you lose in the kidneys, and if it has to, it will pull calcium out of your bones.
And just like vitamin A, it works through nuclear receptors.
Yes, and it also regulates its own production. It's a very tight feedback loop. Clinically, deficiency is rickets in children, those soft, undermineralized bones, and osteomalacia in adults.
And toxicity is particularly dangerous.
Extremely. Too much vitamin D leads to hypercalcemia.
Yeah.
Too much calcium in the blood, which can cause hypertension, and this nasty thing called calcinosis, where soft tissues start to calcify.
Okay, let's talk vitamin E, the body's fat-soluble antioxidant.
It's the main chain-breaking antioxidant in all of our cell membranes. Its whole job is to protect our polyunsaturated fatty acids, the PUFAs, from getting destroyed by free radicals.
And this is a great example of vitamins working together because its function is tied directly to vitamin C.
It's a perfect partnership. Think of vitamin E as the soldier on the front line. It takes the hit from the radical, and in doing so, it becomes a radical itself. It's inactivated.
And then vitamin C comes in to rescue it.
Exactly. Ascorbate from the plasma comes in and reduces that vitamin E radical back to its active form so it can go fight again. Deficiency is pretty rare, but you can see hemolytic anemia in premature babies because their red blood cells are so fragile.
And that brings us to the last of this group, vitamin K, for coagulation.
Right. Its role is as a cofactor for a very specific chemical modification. It allows an enzyme to add a carboxyl group to glutamate residues on certain proteins, forming something called gamma-carboxyglutamate, or GLA.
And why is that GLA residue so important?
Because it acts like a little molecular claw. It chelates calcium ions. And that calcium binding is absolutely required for clotting factors like prothrombin and factor 7, IX, and X to stick to membranes and do their job.
The anticoagulant drug warfarin is the perfect clinical example of this process.
It is. Warfarin works by blocking the enzyme that recycles vitamin K back to its active form, so it breaks the loop. Without active vitamin K, you can't make the GLA residues, the clotting factors are useless, and you achieve anticoagulation.
Now we're shifting gears completely. The water-soluble vitamins, the B complex, and vitamin C, these are the metabolic workhorses.
They are. They are almost all enzyme cofactors carrying around small functional groups. Let's start with thiamine, B1. Its active form is the coenzyme for three massive enzyme complexes, pyruvate dehydrogenase,
A ketoglutarate dehydrogenase.
and branched-chain keto acid dehydrogenase. Huge players in energy metabolism.
So in a B1 deficiency like in beriberi, which one of those failures is the most immediately dangerous?
The failure of pyruvate dehydrogenase, PDH, it's catastrophic. Pyruvate can't enter the citric acid cycle, so it gets shunted to lactate. You get this massive buildup of lactate and pyruvate in the blood, which can cause a life-threatening lactic acidosis.
Next up, riboflavin, B2. It forms FMN and FAD.
The classic electron carriers. Absolutely essential for the respiratory chain. But there's a downside. Some flavin oxidases are notorious for creating superoxide and hydrogen peroxide, which contributes to the cell's total oxidant stress.
And then niacin. We know it as NAD and NADP for redox reactions, but it has this other role.
A secondary role, yes, as the source of ADP ribose. The cell uses that for things like modifying proteins and DNA repair. The deficiency disease is pellagra. And what's interesting is you can get pellagra-like symptoms even if you're eating enough niacin if some other condition is diverting all your tryptophan away from making NAD.
Okay, pyridoxine B6. This one's a powerhouse for amino acid metabolism.
It is. Transamination, decarboxylation, you name it. But it has this really unique regulatory role. Pyridoxyphosphate can actually modulate the action of steroid hormones. It helps pull the hormone receptor complex off of the DNA, shutting down the signal.
So a deficiency could make you hypersensitive to hormones.
It could, but you also have to be very careful with taking too much B6. At very high doses, it's neurotoxic and can cause a sensory neuropathy.
All right, now for the big intertwined pair, folic acid and vitamin B12. Folate is all about carrying one carbon fragments.
Right, and that's essential for making DNA, specifically for methylating DUMP to make TMP, which is the thymidine base in DNA. That's why folate metabolism is such a huge target for chemotherapy drugs like methotrexate. They shut down DNA synthesis in cancer cells.
Which is also why it's so critical for preventing neural tube defects during pregnancy.
Absolutely. Preconception supplements of folic acid have been a massive public health success.
So then there's cobalamin, B12, only found in animal foods, needs intrinsic factor to be absorbed. It's a cofactor for just two enzymes, but one of them creates this direct critical link to folate.
And that link is methionine synthase.
Okay.
This is the enzyme that causes the whole clinical problem known as the folate trap.
Okay, you have to explain the trap. It's so important.
Right. So the body makes a form of folate called methyl tetrahydrofolate. That reaction is a one-way street. It's irreversible. To make that folate useful for other things like making DNA, you have to get that methyl group off.
And that's B12's job.
That is B12's job. The methionine synthase enzyme requires B12 to do it. If you're deficient B12, the enzyme stalls. The methyl group is stuck.
The folate is trapped.
It is trapped. It just piles up in this metabolically useless form. So even if you're consuming tons of folate, your cells are functionally starving for it, and you get a megaloblastic anemia.
Which is often called pernicious anemia, and this is where the huge clinical warning comes in.
It's a profound medical dilemma. If you give someone with a B12 deficiency high doses of folic acid, you can fix the anemia. You bypass the block. The blood work looks better.
Yeah.
But the other function of B12, the one needed to maintain the myelin sheath on nerves, is still failing. So you've masked the obvious symptom, the anemia, while the patient is developing irreversible neurological damage to their spinal cord.
That is terrifying. Okay, let's quickly hit the last three. Biotin.
Coenzyme for carboxylation reactions. Deficiency is incredibly rare. You'd basically only see it with long-term IV feeding or someone eating like dozens of raw egg whites every day.
Pantothenic acid.
It's part of coenzyme A-CoA, central to all metabolism. Deficiency is unknown because it's in everything.
And finally, vitamin C, ascorbic acid. More than just an antioxidant.
Much more. Its key job is keeping metal cofactors, mostly iron and copper, in their reduced state so enzymes can work. The most famous example is for the proline and lysine hydroxylases needed to make stable collagen.
So without vitamin C, your collagen is weak.
Exactly. And that is scurvy. The bleeding gums, the poor wound healing, it's all a direct result of faulty collagen. And a little bonus. It helps you absorb inorganic iron from your gut.
Okay, that covers the vitamins. Quick shift to the minerals. The range of what we need is just vast, right?
It's huge. From grams a day of sodium and calcium down to micrograms of things like selenium and iodine. And with minerals, deficiency is often a matter of geography. If the local soil is lacking in, say, iodine, the whole population can become deficient.
And we have to mention the iron paradox. It's the world's #1 nutritional problem.
Yet about 10% of the population has a genetic risk for iron overload, which is incredibly toxic. Free iron catalyzes the formation of very damaging free radicals. It's a constant balancing act between too little and too much.
So if you had to summarize the functions of minerals.
You've got structural roles like calcium and bone, membrane roles like sodium and potassium for nerve impulses. You've got prosthetic groups and enzymes like iron and zinc, and regulatory roles like iodine and thyroid hormone. They're trace amounts, but their function is macro. So to just quickly recap the most complex takeaways from this, first, that dual function of the lipid-soluble vitamins, especially vitamin A's RXR receptor, linking it directly to vitamin D and thyroid hormones.
Second, the central role of cofactors like thiamine, B1, in preventing a metabolic disaster like lactic acidosis.
And third, that absolutely critical and potentially dangerous relationship between folate and vitamin B12, the folate trap. Understanding that is just non-negotiable in medicine.
So I'll leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about the public health debate around mandatory folic acid enrichment of foods like bread and cereal. On one hand, it's been an unbelievable success, drastically reducing neural tube defects, a huge win.
No question.
But on the other hand, it carries that calculated risk of masking the anemia of a B12 deficiency, especially in the elderly, allowing that silent nerve damage to progress. So the question is, how do regulatory bodies balance a massive proven public good against a specific, serious, but hidden risk for a smaller group? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the micronutrients. We hope this has been your shortcut to being well informed.